Hello and welcome to this tutorial on setting up motion path animation using 3D Studio Max and Unity 2018.4. I'm using this version of the Unity editor because it is the latest LTS version for long-term support and should ideally contain the most robust version of the editor for production. As always, I'm going to put a download link to a Unity package file for this project in the video description, so go look down there for that and you will have access to that. So I'm going to jump on over into my 3D application that I'm using, which is 3D Studio Max. I've done this same technique in Maya as well, and I'm fairly certain that these same techniques can be done in Blender. So these principles will apply in almost all 3D authoring software and should be functional in those programs. What we're going to do is create a path based on a spline. We're going to attach an object to this path, and we're going to create a procedural animation based on that attachment relationship. We're then going to export that animation as an FBX file and bring it into the Unity engine to demonstrate a practical application of this technique. So let's start in 3D Studio Max by looking at this simple game environment that we have. So this represents a game environment. This could also be a proxy and not the final environment that would be rendered in Unity, but just an idea of an environment for scale. In our case, the environment inside of 3D Studio Max here for this tutorial is the exact environment that I would have in Unity. So I'm going to export this as an FBX into Unity so that we have our game environment there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder called model. Yours can be called mesh or anything. You're free to use whatever naming convention you like. And then I'll call it environment. And as any of your FBX settings would be in any software, I don't need to bake any animation for this environment, so I'll turn that off. I'm not going to export any lights or cameras or anything with it, but the scale factor I want to look at particularly, and I'm going to be using meters and a scale factor of 1 in 3D Studio Max. So 1 unit in Max is 1 meter, and the same applies inside of Unity. So in Unity, I've just went in here and right-clicked, create a folder, called it Motion Path Animation to kind of store what I'm working on for this. And I've created that model folder, and the FBX has gone in there. I'm going to check the inspector real quick and just make sure the units, the scale factor is also 1. And the unit conversion was fine. 1 meter in the file is 1 meter in Unity, so it was a 1-to-1. Now it is possible to work in centimeters or different types of unit systems and do a conversion between Unity and your 3D software, but I find it the most intuitive and best to go 1-to-1, 1 meter in the 3D software and 1 meter in Unity, and it is the best way to work, in my opinion. I'm going to drag this environment over into the scene, and now we have this game environment to work with in the scene. So our practical application of this tutorial today is going to be let's create a cinematic fly-through camera just to fly through this world. And it could be something you use when you're rendering a background in a menu, or you're waiting for the player to start a multiplayer match or something like that, and you just have a camera kind of flying around the world showing it off. So there is our game environment, the proxy environment that we would like to use. Let's jump back over into 3D Studio Max. Well, before we do that real quick, if you look at my editor and some things and it looks strange, one of the things I generally do here is this default skybox that you see in the editor view. I never usually see a reason when I'm in production to see that, or fog or flares or things like that. So I just turn this and click them off. The other thing is I use the tall layout here, so by default it comes in like this. I just scoot it over like that. I'll go into the project window here and just turn it into a 1-column layout. The console window was lost, but we always want that, so I go to Window, General, Console, and just bring it back, and I minimize the height small as I can, and I keep it just wide enough so that we can see all those lovely debug warnings and compile errors. Just wonderful. So there is our environment in Unity. Let's go into 3D Studio Max and create this motion path, this spline animation in a procedural way, and then bring that into Unity. So the goal here is to keep our source in our 3D content software, whether that's Maya, Max, or Blender. Do most of our animating and modification to our artwork and things like that in here, and then do all of our final rendering in Unity, and have to do less of fiddling with things like splines, and because I am aware that there are packages and setups and third-party dependencies, which is the worst part of that, for bringing splines and things into Unity and creating them in Unity, but it would be best to rely on Unity for the rendering aspect, in my opinion, and do things like spline, procedural spline animation in your 3D software, rather than importing some Unity package that may not be supported in a newer version of Unity or be supported anymore by the developer. So this just simplifies things. So let's, in 3D Studio Max here, let's go create shapes. And for now, we'll just create a circle, and we'll left click into this area and just create a circle probably about, I'd say, yay big, and hit the W key to complete that. And go down here and just zero it out, the coordinates, so it's centered on our world. And that's pretty bright, the default color that was given to this object created. But what I'll generally do is go in here and color it something like bright orange or bright yellow, just so it has a lot of contrast against the world, and we can see it better. So I'm going to right click on that spline, and I'm going to go convert, or this shape, because it's not a spline yet, and I'm going to convert to editable spline. Another way to do this is up here in the modifier list. You can go over here and just find the edit spline modifier and add that on top, and you can have that on top. Then you can collapse it if you want, and either way you get an editable spline, so that works out. Okay, and then the next thing we'll want to do is probably name this something other than default circle, so I'm going to call this path. So now we have a path that we're going to animate this object around in a non-destructive way. So let's go under File and Save. Always save often, at least every 10 minutes. Just save your progress, just in case you suffer from a computer shutdown or lockup, or a power surge or failure in your neighborhood or something like that. So what we want to do for our purposes is what I'm going to do here, so I'm going to right click on this mesh, I'm going to go into Object Properties, I'm going to turn off Show Frozen in Gray, and then I'm going to leave that, right click again, and I'm going to just freeze the selection. You can do this in other 3D software. Well, basically all that does is makes it to where the mesh for the environment for now is just sort of a proxy that I'm looking at, but I can't select it or edit any vertices or faces or anything. It's because my priority here is just to animate a camera around this world, but not to mess with the world itself. This is just to make sure I don't fly a camera through a building or through a rock wall or something like that. So what we want to do is create the equivalent of an empty game object in Max. An empty game object that we would see in Unity. So let's go under Create, and then we'll go under Helpers, and we'll create this dummy. And we will left mouse click in the world and just drag a little until we get it to a scale we like. I'm content with that. I'll hit W, and it is completed. I'll select it, and then we will zero it out again. Another way to zero out is to just hover over the lower arrow here and right mouse button, and you can zero that. So that's a shortcut. I was doing it the long way to just kind of demonstrate for that. Now with this dummy selected, let's go over here to this Utilities tab, or a little hammer icon over here, and hit Reset Xform, Reset Selected. And Maya, that is the equivalent of, I believe that is modify, I'm trying to recall what that is, Reset Transforms, Modify Transforms, something like that. We'll right click on that, we'll collapse to, and so we have this clean dummy here. Okay, and the next step we want to do is create the Create menu here, Cameras, Free Camera, and just click left mouse drag and let it go, and there it is. We'll hit W. Let's hit F3 on the keyboard We're just going to go to a wireframe. That's what that the F3 key in 3ds Max does. And this way we can see what we got going on with our camera here. And so in 3ds Max, it uses a slightly different coordinate system than Unity. So the positive z-axis in Unity inside of 3D Studio Max is the y-axis. So we look at our coordinates here, and we see that z is up in 3D Studio Max and y is forward, whereas in Unity, y is up and z is forward. So this is our forward z-axis going down this way, and our camera is facing down in the wrong way. So let's make sure we have angle snap. The toggle is on and it's blue, and let's just rotate this around 180 degrees so we're facing the right way, and then face it up 90 degrees so that we're now facing down the positive z. And as we did with the dummy element, let us reset this to the center of the world so that the dummy is at 0, 0, 0 and the camera is at 0, 0, 0. I'm going to go into the camera's color here, click that blue, and I'm going to make it some kind of gaudy color so it just stands out really, really strong. And I'm going to take this dummy and I'm going to name this fly cam container. So let it know that this is the container or parent of the fly camera, and then we will call the fly camera fly cam. And so the reason we've created two elements is because here is the path that we're going to animate along, and we need to attach an object to that path. And so we're going to attach this dummy object and have that stuck to the path. But I don't want the camera itself to be directly stuck to the path. I still want to be able to move my camera around and edit it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the camera a child object of the dummy. So the dummy will become the parent object. I'm going to group them or child parent them. So I'm going to click here under Manage Layers and just look at the layers in the Scene Explorer here, Layer Explorer in 3D Studio Max. And I'll see our container and our camera. And you know, in other software like Maya, you can literally grab the camera and you could middle mouse drag that or into the parent, and you would see it be the child parent in there. You would see that relationship, but you don't in 3D Studio Max. In 3D Studio Max, to do the parent-childing, you have to link or link them together. So you would select the child, you'll click this little chain, select and link, and then you will click on your child and then drag to your parent. And that link was successful, and we know it will be because we select the parent and we will move it, and now the child comes along with it. That camera is now grouped and childed under the green dummy, so when I select the green dummy it follows with it. And the great thing is the camera is fully independent, so the camera can go wherever it wants, but it doesn't affect the dummy. And now this dummy could rotate it, and there's this cool offset now for the camera. This has big implications for kind of separating what you can do for the animation of this object versus this object. Gives you a couple more layers of animation versus just having one. So let's go to File Save, because we save often. So now we have this dummy object with the child camera, and we can attach that dummy object to this path to do the animation. So with the dummy object selected, let's go under the Animation menu and let us go to Constraints, and then we will go to Path Constraint. And then this line will appear that will say, where is your path, your editable spline? And there it is. And I will click on it, and it has jumped over to the path. Now we have our time slider open down here, and if we scroll through this time slider window here, we will see that we have an animation down this path. There are a few issues here. Something that I want to bring up real quick is I'm going to do something really fast here. By default, when you go in 3D Studio Max, this is probably what this is going to look like. You're going to see 100 frames in this time slider window, okay? And you're going to see this white keyframe here at the end at frame 100, and you're going to see the black keyframe created there at 0. And these are keyframes created for this path constraint. And I just reverted the 900. So what I do here is we go into this time configuration for this time slider here, And on end time, instead of 100, we set it to 900. We hit OK. And now we have 900 frames, but our end keyframe for this procedural animation still ends at 100. So what I did was I set the timeline to 900, and then I dragged that last keyframe to 900. So now we get this kind of proper speed. And what that changes is the amount of frames makes this animation slower, right? So if we want to speed up how fast it moves along that curve, we would just, let's say 500. Now we hit play. It's moving quite a bit faster. If we go to, let's say 200, and we hit play, it's moving really fast. Depends on the speed you want. So if we have it go to 200, and then that's where we want our animation to loop and end, let's set our keyframes to that 200, and then hit play, and it will loop through based on 200 frames. However, I found from practicing this tutorial a bit earlier that 900 frames was the ideal speed that I wanted. Okay, so the reason that it jumped to this spot on the spline is if we look at this editable spline, it has vertices on it, each vertex. And these vertex have an order, which goes a certain way, and they're numbered. So this is vertex 1, and that's why it jumped to this vertex. You can see that the camera jumped directly over top of this vertex. So how do we know that that is that vertex? And what's interesting on that is if we go to, I'm trying to find it here in 3D Studio Max. I want to say it was under selection right here. You can actually, and it's very difficult to see because it's super tiny and it's in a really dark font, but if we show vertex numbers, we can see that this is vertex 1, this is 2. You can see down here the data for this spline. So it says spline 1, vert 2 selected, vert 1 selected, vert 2, vert 3, vert 4. That's why the object jumped to this one, because it's vertex 1. Now you can select any, let me end the isolate here. You can select any vertex on here, and if we go into the spline, there is a make first. Oops. And we can click that, and the camera will jump to that. So if you need to make one of these vertexes your starting point, that's what you'd want to do. And so the camera will animate procedurally or travel down the spline based on the winding order of the vertices. So if this is 1, and this is 2, and this is 3, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, and that's why it's traveling counterclockwise. But we can reverse that order of the vertices by going in here, and we go to spline mode and select the whole spline, and then we just click this reverse. So nothing happened because this is still spline 1, but if we select this, we see that that is vert 2, and when we hit play now, we're actually moving clockwise around it. So that's how you would change the direction of travel down your spline. If you're thinking, oh, it's going the wrong way, it's reversed. So I've shown you how to change the speed, and I've shown you how to change the direction, which is great. So let's look at the object, this dummy, that's actually the thing that is constrained to this path. We'll go under the motion tab here, and what we see down here that in these controller parameters that are assigned here, that we see a path constraint. We get a few options for setting active, deleting it, cutting it. You can even kind of change the weighting on it to transition between a couple of different path constraints. It's really wild what you could do. But for our purposes, we want to look kind of right here. So we get this percentage along path, which is kind of neat. And you go along and you see that it shows you, hey, we can even type in a number in here. There's 25% along the path, right? What gets really wild is you can set a key here to make it kind of go fast on one part of the path and then slow on another. And maybe I'll just demonstrate that real quick. So it says right here it's 32% along the path. So let's right click and add a key, and we have our key. And if we take that 32% and say we moved it to frame 50, we get really fast travel between the starting point and then that point, and then it slows down. So if you want to tweak kind of the speed between points on the spline, that's exactly how you could do it. I don't need to do that here. I'm going to zero it back out and start it at 0. But if you want to kind of speed it up here and then slow it down here and then speed it up here and then slow it down there, that's exactly how you would do that, setting keys down here in the timeline. Now, as it travels around the spline, we see it just keeps facing straight down the Y or Z axis in Unity in the world, and we want it to kind of look down our path. So if we click follow, we now see that it travels, the green dummy box travels straight down the path. And by default, we're still looking at the world axis here, so we still see our green, and let me see if I can enlarge them. There we go. We can still see that they stick with the world, and they're not, the axes are not pointing down the path. So if we go here to view and we go local, we can see, oh, there we go. It is traveling and pointing down the path locally as it should. The strange thing is, though, is it's pointing X down the path, and that is this axis setting here. So you can make it go Y, and you can make it go Z, and you can also flip it. So you can get that proper orientation that you want. And ideally in Max, since we want to look down like the local Z, and you always kind of want to point down Z, which in Max is Y, we just select that Y, and then it's just perfect in there, and the camera is facing the right direction as well. Okay. We want to keep constant velocity on, so it just travels at the same speed all the way down the spline. And you can turn off loop. But I keep loop on. You can also do kind of a neat thing here, and you can bank it. So if you want to do banking on the spline, you can click banking, where it'll kind of like, if you're doing an airplane and you're animating an airplane along a spline, this would be real handy. But we're not doing anything like that here. But just to let you know, that is very useful. The follow the bank, you can also allow it to go upside down. There's just all kinds of cool things you can do. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is the thing that I want to export out to Unity is really just the camera. I want to export out this camera. So what I'm going to do is we're going to save, and I'm going to export this camera. I'm going to go File, Export, Export Selected. I'm going to go into my Unity asset folder, and I've created a folder there called Animation. And I'm going to call this animation just Flying Camera. It's going to be an FBX. I'm going to go in the FBX. I'm going to make sure for this animation is turned on. You want to bake down your animation or bake your keyframes, whatever it's referred to in the software you're using, Maya or Max. You want to make sure it starts at 0, and you want to make sure the end frame is where your animation actually ends. In my case, it's 900. And then you scroll down, and in our case here, I want to make sure cameras are exported. That's what we want to come out, cameras. And then I'm going to look at my units, which is under advanced option units, and my scale factor is 1, and I'm in meters. So that is great. That's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to hit OK. We're going to go over into Unity, and I have my animation folder, and it's called Flying Camera, and I can look in here, and I'm going to compare it against the world model, and the world model is a scale factor of 1. The flying camera is a scale factor 1. You want those scale factors to match so that the camera is in the exact same place in your 3D world that you were working in Max or Blender or Maya, and it's in the same spot in Unity. So they match, and so we don't need visibility on this or lights, but we do want to bring the camera in. We're going to hit apply, and then on animation, in this case I want it to loop, so I'm going to hit loop time, and 900 frames is correct. Always make sure to check this because it might have been defaulted to 100 or something like that. And then the name of the animation by default here is Take 01, and I don't like that, so I'm just going to call it Flying. And we don't need any keyframe reduction, so I'm not going to worry about that. And I'm going to hit apply. So the animation is in. We do not need materials for this, so I'm going to uncheck it. apply. We don't have to worry about the rig. It's not a big deal. And then our camera is ready to go. I'm going to drag that asset in, and there it is. And so here is the dummy object in 3D Studio Max, so that parent object that has the animation on it. And then there is the camera as a child under it. Now, I didn't bother to mess with the settings for the lens and the field of view on this camera and the far and near range. And I haven't figured out how to quite tweak them to come in perfect, but they come in with weird values, so I'm just going to fix those weird values very easily and just set those values to something that you like. Every time you re-export this out, those will come in fine, and you won't have to keep changing these. That's set now. Okay, so let's hit play, and it's not going to work. Spoiler alert, nothing's going to play. We see no movement, and that's just because some of you that have worked in Unity for a while know we don't have an animation controller on this Mechanim animation. So let's right-click our animation folder, create, and do Animator Controller, and just call it, I guess, FlyCam, whatever you want to call it. Go back to our animator, drag FlyCam onto it. Okay, let's double-click FlyCam to edit it. Double-click, and here we see our little Mechanim state machine in here. And it's very easy to work with this. Let's just right-click in the empty space, create a state, create empty. This is the new state that's going to come in from an entry. You could create your own state machine for this to trigger this cinematic animation to play at the level's end or at the end of at the death in a multiplayer match or whatever. But in our case, we just want it to play right when the scene starts for the demo. So double click the state. You're going to see this motion tab here. Let's click the little circle, and there's our take one. I could have swore we renamed that. So let's go back to our animated object. Go back to animation. I swore we fixed that. Let's call it flying. Let's apply. Go back. It says flying. That's weird. Okay, now it says flying, so it updated. I don't know why it didn't catch that the last time we were doing it, but it nonetheless doesn't matter. So now our camera animation for FlyCam has an animation controller. We can hit play. And these are just weird editor errors. And we can see we are flying a cinematic camera around our world in Unity. There we go. A couple of issues. We're too low to the ground, and we're not exactly facing inboard like I kind of wanted to do. Very easy to solve since this is non-destructive. Let's take the spline that the camera is moving along, and let's just type in, say, 2 meters up. Now, other thing we want to do is up in our viewport here in 3ds Max, let's hit this. We're in the perspective viewport. Let's just hit this little plus button and configure viewports. And let's go to just do any of these that are 2 viewports side by side, either horizontally or vertically. Hit apply. And so this right here is still our perspective window. We see that because it's highlighted yellow perspective. But this is also a perspective window, but we want to preview our fly camera. So let's click the perspective, cameras, and select this fly cam. It will use the name that we named this camera, which was fly cam. So now in 3D Studio Max over here in our secondary window, that is our fly camera. So we'll be able to preview that before we even get it into Unity. But we can see everything sort of lines up, the framing and the speed and everything like that. And we can see that we're now up at a height that we want to be. But we need to get the camera to face a little bit more inboard. I'm going to go into wireframe and just select the camera that way. So this big advantage of making the camera the child of the dummy, so the dummy is stuck to this path, but the camera is not. So now the camera could be anywhere. You can do anything you want with this camera at this point freely. You could add a little bit of bumpy camera shake or noise to it. You could do a sub animation with it kind of swinging around as it moves down that curve, but what I'm going to do is just swivel the camera a little inside, like such, just a little. And I'm going to make sure I'm still on the local axis for the camera because I want to rotate it to look down on the world a little bit. And so we were able to do all that to that camera without affecting the non-destructive or procedural nature of this dummy object. That's why we childed the camera, to basically tweak what we want on the motion path animation and then take the sub-object of the camera and do whatever the heck we want to it. So let's file save, let's file export selected, flying camera, that's the name we wanted, making sure it wasn't animating over or exporting over our environment model. It starts at frame 0, ends at 900, correct? Oh, I middle mouse button that. And make sure we're exporting cameras. This is an interesting thing. So if in Blender or Maya you don't get the native support in FBX to export a camera directly to Unity, what you can do is just export this dummy node and bake the animation down for it. And when you bring it into Unity, this dummy node will fly around and animate in the exact same way, and then you can just create a camera in Unity and drag it in as a child in Unity and do it that way. That is another option. Let's hit play and make sure our changes where it's now, yep, now it's high up in the world. I've got a slight issue there where I'm going through the buildings, but now it's also looking down on the world, which is exactly what we wanted. And basically we could do whatever we want. The possibilities are endless on this. So when you see how this can be kind of non-destructive and procedural, you notice that you could take this spline here and you could make this literally a roller coaster. So if you ever need to previs for anyone, a client or anything like that, you need to previs something like a camera flying through a roller coaster in a theme park, there you go. I mean, this would be the way to do it. Let's hit play and see what that's like. Yeah, this is insane. If you need to visualize a cinematic of, I'm very curious to see that in Unity now, but if you wanted to visualize something like a bird flying or vehicles, maybe a cinematic of vehicles driving around a large city in Unity, that would be a great scenario. This is just a really powerful non-destructive way to do this animation, and it can be used for a lot more than just being used in Unity. You can use this to render things inside of 3D Studio Max as well. So hopefully that was really helpful, and as always, I've appreciated all of you as viewers, and I'm always open to criticism, feedback, or advice, or any future subjects to cover. And don't forget, if you've enjoyed this content and you want to see more tutorials on how to do interesting things in Unity, make sure to tap that subscribe button below, and have a nice evening.